a bit of a curveball, so we'll get there. Anna, just to say to you, because I'm now the host, I can see that there's people in the waiting room. Are you happy to just deal with that if I just ignore it? If that's okay with you. And also, we hopefully should have time for questions at the end. So if anybody does have any questions, please feel free to pop them into the chat. And Anna, you're going to keep an eye on the chat, and then hopefully we'll pick things up. If there's any absolutely burning issues as we go through, if I'm just talking gobbledygook and you just need to pause me and ask me to explain it a different way, then feel free to kind of interrupt Anna. But otherwise, if we could hold questions to the end, it may well be that I cover it, so hopefully it will work. So yeah, thank you so much guys for joining me. I know that everybody is really frantically busy. It's a busy time of year anyway, returning to schools, and this year is just, you know, phenomenal really in terms of everyone's workload and capacity. So thank you so much for taking the time to be here. If people are joining us from Birmingham Children's Trust, some of this presentation, a lot of this presentation may look familiar to the presentations that I've done already on emotional well-being, but obviously it'll be new to you guys in education, which is what it was sort of tailored for. So as Anna said, my name's Marie Kershaw. I'm a clinical psychologist and clinical psychology lead for Birmingham Children's Trust, and I work in the adoption service in the trust. And I've worked for about the last 20 years specialising in trauma and anxiety and stress, and as well as supporting children and young people, a big part of my work role is also supporting staff groups and supporting the systems that sit around children and young people, because we know from the research that one of the strongest predictors of resilience, one of the strongest predictors of emotional well-being is actually having safe, supportive relationships. And so a lot of the work that I do with children and families, with staff group, is really emphasising the importance of relationships, relational connection, and how we can use relationships to help us at times of emotional distress. And that's partly what I want to talk to you about today. And I think never really has that been more important than right now. One of the biggest impacts of COVID, apart from the obvious sort of physical health impact, has been the impact that it's had on our social relationships. And because our social relationships are one of the primary ways that humans feel good and feel safe, this has been really a particularly testing time for everybody, because the very thing that we lean into at times of stress has been the thing that's been denied to us for so long through COVID. And even now that we are allowed to mix and to be with our support systems to a greater extent than we were at the beginning of COVID, it's still not normal. And so what we're noticing in terms of well-being, what we need to hold on to at this time, thinking about our own well-being, is that this is not normal. And so our bodies and our brains are getting really mixed signals right now. We're getting signals of return to work, return to normality, return to the classroom, but we're also getting signals of danger. And this is really confusing for our minds, for our bodies, for our nervous systems. So I guess what I just wanted to do today was to offer this webinar to you guys as the adults, as the grown-ups, hopefully as a way to help you to think about how you might be supporting young people coming back to school, but more fundamentally thinking about the crucial importance of looking after yourself during this time. Because if we don't have the grown-ups in a good place, then the kids are less likely to be in a good place. So it's important for our own selves, our own needs, and it's also important for thinking about how we support the children and young people that we're there to work with. And again, I just wanted to really acknowledge just how hard things have been over the last few months, and particularly thinking about education. There's a lot of rhetoric about a return to work. And I know that for most of you, this isn't about a return to work, because actually you've been working, and you've been working really, really hard under really challenging circumstances. Hopefully some of you will have been able to have a break over the summer. But you know, the rhetoric about returning to work kind of implies that we've just been all sitting around doing nothing, and I know that that's not the case. So, you know, I'm a psychologist in the city, but I'm also mum to 2 children who go to schools in Birmingham, and I know how hard people have been working, and I guess I just really want to to acknowledge that. So thinking about all the huge changes that we've been through over the last couple of months, it's no wonder that we might need some support, some focused attention on our emotional well-being to try and help make sense of some of the big emotions, the anxiety, and probably at times kind of mushy heads, if you're anything like me, that you might have been experiencing over the last few months. And to try and make sense of some of that, and to try and think with you about some strategies and some things that you can do to help yourself. And again, one of the things I'm always mindful of on doing emotional well-being webinars is that sometimes when we think about things that we can do for ourselves, sort of self-help things, it can seem a bit obvious, or sometimes can seem a bit too simple, or even a bit twee. And I think sometimes in complex situations, the temptation is to look for complex solutions. But actually, sometimes we really do just need to go right back to basics. And I know that for me, re-anchoring myself back into some of the science that sits behind some of these steps that might seem quite simple on the surface, but actually are so crucially important to helping our brains, helping our bodies feel safe, protect downtime, and really look after our own psychological health. Okay, so as I said, the first thing I just wanted to say is, really just to acknowledge again that you're all doing really important work under really difficult circumstances. These mixed signals that we're getting, return to work, but it's still not safe, and we don't quite know the risk, but we're being told it's okay. This is really confusing for us. And as I say, there's probably been times over the last few months where you felt perfectly fine, perfectly okay, and then other days when you just really haven't. Just days when you think, I can't do this, I don't know how to do this, can I even remember how to teach? What's it going to be like being back in the classroom? There's maybe times when you've felt anxious. If you've been through bereavement or you've been personally affected by COVID, you might also have felt very significant sadness, frustration. But I think with the return to work, there's also at times feelings of resentment can creep in. One of the things that we know is that COVID is a very different experience for different people, and different people have different levels of risk and different levels of anxiety. And so this experience is different for different people. So whatever it is that you're experiencing, just try to remember that these are really normal responses to a really abnormal situation. There are lots and lots of things that are flooding our stress response systems right now. And whether that be stresses about physical health, whether it be around a lack of choice, this ongoing lack of certainty, juggling multiple competing demands. We also know now, don't we, that COVID has hit some of our communities harder than others. Our Black and minority ethnic friends and colleagues and families have been hit particularly hard, and that's also come on the back of the really tragic killing of George Floyd in the States, which, again, on top of all the stresses of COVID, has also been another really significant stress for people during this time that for some people has felt really quite re-traumatizing. And I think it's really important that we hold on to these multiple layers of stress that different people have experienced during this time as we start to transition back. So as I said, we might notice that, our emotions are up and down. Some days we think, great, yep, get me back to the class, I'm totally ready, I can do this, I've got it. And then the next day you just want to hide under the duvet and pretend that it's not happening, or just, stay on holiday. I've just come back from holiday, and I know there was definitely a little bit of me that could have just happily hid in a little holiday house and not had to face real life going forwards. But the reality is that some days you are going to feel okay, and some days it's just going to feel much harder. So it's really important to keep checking in with yourself. How am I doing today? What am I noticing about myself today? What do I need to think about in terms of protecting my well-being today? As I've said, it's really important, particularly in this phase of the pandemic, when we're thinking about returning to the classroom, returning to our working environments, that although we are all experiencing COVID at the same time, we're not all experiencing it in the same way. And so the impact of COVID is going to be felt very differently for different people at different times. this was true at the height of the pandemic, and it's going to be true for, you know, the foreseeable future. Some people have additional risk factors, some people have additional stress factors, some people have more or less resources available at their disposal to see them through this. And it's really, really important to remember this as we move forward into this next step, because what we know is that at times of stress, our capacity for curiosity for the experience of other people, our capacity for empathy, our capacity to hold other people's perspectives in mind goes down. And so we might find that we're starting to get more irritated by other people. We're only seeing things through our lens, and we're more likely to go into reactive mode. And this is true the longer that this pandemic goes on. So whereas in the beginning we saw lots of community spirit, we saw lots of camaraderie and solidarity, what we can expect to see now, and what we've started to see, is a kind of reduction in that compassion and that community spirit and that coming together. And actually that can start to turn into anger or resentment or just plain fatigue. So whereas in the beginning, and I'm thinking about, you know, senior leaders or people who are in a management position, you know, we might have been able to hold more empathy for people's struggles, for people's risk, for people's anxiety. But as time goes on and the pressure is just to get back to it, just to get on with it, we start to lose that compassion. And I would really encourage you to be mindful of when you notice that starting to creep in. The other stressor for us is that as helping professionals or educators, we're used to being the people who are helping others. We're not always good at being at the helped end. But COVID has flipped the table on this, really. It's turned all of that upside down and back to front. Usually, as the grown-ups in a school, you know, people look to us to know what we're doing. We've got it, you know, everything's under control. And actually, the reality is, behind the scenes, we're all just trying to figure this out. None of us has the expert map for this. None of us has, you know, our risk assessments nailed. You know, we really are learning on the job, and this creates additional stress, and it creates an additional sense of feeling overwhelmed. So sometimes when we're used to being the helpers, we're not always good at asking for help or recognizing when we might need help. So again, it's just important to recognize that if you're finding that you need more help than usual, you're not coping as well as you might normally do, again, that's perfectly normal. The other thing that I would encourage you to think about is, as we've started to realise, COVID is not a sprint, it is a marathon. We are in this for the long term. And sometimes our instinct as a helper or a supportive role is to, you know, in a crisis, in a difficult situation, is to be the person that kind of rushes to help, to fix, to find solutions. And actually, you know, the pressure on teachers and on schools to have this totally nailed by day one, you know, whatever day of this week your school goes back, there's a kind of inherent, you know, expectation that you're going to have it nailed. And what I would just really, again, encourage you to do and to think about with your staff groups is that this is going to be a learning process. We are going to have to pace ourselves. We are going to have to make adjustments, and that's okay. And again, depending on our own coping styles, sometimes what we can do is have like a really strong urge to like go, do, get it all done. And we don't look after ourselves, and then we collapse. Or we might go the other way, where actually things feel so overwhelming that we just want to retreat. We just want to put our heads down, not think about it, go into avoidance mode, wait for it all to blow over. Or we might feel that we're kind of flip-flopping between those two positions at any one time. And in any, you know, whichever way, you know, you're more likely to cope, the best bit of advice that I can give you is pay attention. Pay attention to what you're noticing about yourself. Pay attention to your own reactions, because by paying attention to them, that's what's going to help give you clues. If we just go into pure avoidance mode, then we find it really hard to deal with in the long term. And I've got a nice little analogy of this. I don't know if you guys have ever seen these. I'll try and show you. I've still got the label on this one. These are Chinese finger traps. And the idea is that if you put your finger in the trap, if you try and pull away from the tension, if you try and pull away from the situation, you try and avoid the situation, you get stuck and you get more entrenched. And sometimes actually, to help ourselves with our emotional well-being, we have to really pay attention. We have to push in and lean into the difficulty that we're feeling. And in that way, we're more likely to be able to resolve the problem. So if you're noticing that you're working really hard to just not pay attention to this stuff, just be curious with yourself about why that might be. Oh, what's happened here? Something has happened. Oh, gosh.
It's encouraging you to lean into the discomfort of your Chinese finger trap. That's
absolutely. It's a
lean
really,
into it to release yourself.
It's a really good moment of talking about regulation. I've lost my slides and I've got a really strange thing has popped up on my screen. Okay. This is the difference between doing live training and online training. If you're doing live training and something weird happens, you can all see it. And so we're having a shared experience. And so, you know, if my mind goes blank, you all know what I'm doing. Whereas on Zoom, if something weird happens at my end, then you've got no idea what's going on. And so I just look really strange staring into the into the blankness. Okay. Oh, I'm trying to.
It's going to find your slide, Marie.
Sorry, what seems to be happening is that every time I go to click on a slide, I'm getting a really strange internet pop-up, which I'm not entirely sure why that's happening. Oh, sorry, folks. Okay, hopefully that's moved on now.
You going?
Okay, I'm just going to move past because I think I've pretty much said this. Okay, something strange is happening. Oh God, I hate the internet. What's happening is that my slides are what you can see and what I can see are not the same thing, and I'm not quite sure why that's happening. I'm really sorry.
Do you want me to put the slides up on mine, Marie?
Yeah, that might be the easiest thing, Anna.
Okay, let's go.
I'm not sure what. Sorry, bear with me 1 second. It might be, let me do end slideshow and let me go back into it. I'm not quite sure what happened. I had a really strange pop-up and it went a bit wonky donkey.
We seem thwarted every time with some kind of technical hitch on this one.
I know. It's oh, I'm really sorry. I don't know what's happened here. It's gone. The slides have gone out of sync. Okay. I think I'm just going to have to improvise here. For some reason, what I can see and what you can see are not the same thing.
So some of what you'll go on to talk about, Marie, I'm guessing some people might, if they've been to any of the sessions on anxiety and things, then people might have heard our FTB colleagues talk about your elephant, meerkat and wise owl brain. So,
okay.
So Marie uses slightly different language to explain exactly the same thing, but also I think hopefully you've got your little puppets there as well that you'll be able to use.
I have.
Do you want me to put my slides up and flick through for you?
I think what I'm going to do is, what's happening is that for some reason the notes page and the slides page has all gone wonky, but in good old-fashioned style, I do have a printed copy with me. So I just need to see which one. Okay, I think I can see what it's on. Okay, let's carry on. So this is going to make good sense for what we're about to talk about. So one of the things that that I like to do when I'm talking about stress, as Anna said, is to translate this into language that young people can understand. So although we're talking about this in terms of your emotional well-being, this is actually a way that you can talk to young people about this stuff too. So I want to talk to you a little bit about your stress system and how it works and why this is firing up right now and why we're not feeling so great at the moment. In a nutshell, our brains and our bodies are really smart. So when we're faced with threat, when we're faced with danger, our bodies are designed to try and keep us safe. So they're very, very quick to react. So when we're feeling stress, even if at the minute there's no active, live, immediate risk, but we're still feeling that hangover effect of anxiety, that's not because your body and your mind are failing you. It's not because you're going mad. It's because your body and your brain are picking up on very subtle cues of danger that are still around in our environment. And we call this neuroception. So this is the signals that our bodies and our brain are getting that are outside of our conscious awareness. And this is really, really important, because when we think about why am I feeling stressed, sometimes we think, but I'm not stressed. I haven't got anything to feel stressed about. And what we're forgetting about is all that cumulative layer of stuff that's been rumbling around for us over the last few months, and the subtle signals of danger that our minds and bodies are still receiving. So when we are in a situation of high danger, as we've been over the last few months, our brains and our bodies send really quick fire signals to each other to tell us to protect ourselves. And this is really important for our survival. So these are really hardwired mechanisms that are, as I say, they're often beyond our conscious control until we really stop and think about them. So I want to tell you the story about, I think you mentioned some colleagues might call it slightly different things. So the way that I explain it to kids is the story of our dinosaur brain, our scaredy cat brain, and our wise owl brain. And for good, healthy brains and good, healthy emotional functioning, all three of these parts of our brain need to be working together. But what happens at times of danger is that actually, at times of threat, our brain processes information from the bottom of our brain up, from the more primitive parts of our brain up to the newer parts of our brain. So basically what happens is that the information comes in, signals of threat or danger come in, or safety, and it's processed up first through our dinosaur brain, okay, our brain stem. And then it reaches our limbic system, our scaredy cat brain, which is like the emotional center of the brain. And this is where like our fight, flight, freeze systems sit. Now, this is really important because if when the information comes in, we detect threat or danger or something isn't safe, then this is where the information gets processed. This is the guy who's in the driving seat. And what doesn't happen is that the information doesn't get processed up to our wise owl brain, our neocortex. And it's in our wise owl brain that sits all our problem solving, our reasoning, our rationalizing, our action consequence thinking, all of the kind of thinking power, if you like, in a very simplistic way that we have sits in our wise owl brain. But when we're under significant stress, wise owl brain, neocortex, goes offline or becomes much slower, and it's scaredy cat brain who's in the decision-making seat. And this is why, even though we might consciously, rationally know something, it doesn't change how we feel about it. So a silly example, go back to the examples of the loo roll situation right at the beginning of lockdown, okay? Now, not having loo roll is not a life-threatening situation. It's inconvenient, but it's not a life-threatening situation. And even though our wise owl brain might know we don't need to buy 17 packs of toilet roll, we just need one to get through this week, we didn't listen to our wise owl brain. What happened was that our scaredy cat brain was in charge, and scaredy cat brain is not very smart, okay? He can't tell the difference between an immediate life-threatening danger that's happening right now and whether we've not got toilet roll. Okay, he just knows that he's getting loads of signals from the environment that something is not right, something is not safe, something bad is happening. And that's what he's reacting to. The nuance of that is lost on him. Okay, so this guy was driving our behavior to go and try and panic buy toilet roll, even though our wise owl brain knew it was crazy. Okay, and this is really, really important for schools, because this is where most children and young people's behavioral problems come from. When they're in a situation where it's not their clever thinking brain that's in charge, their learning brain, but it's their scaredy cat brain, their emotional, fear-driven, anxiety-driven brain that's in charge, this is when you see lots of challenging behaviour, because essentially what's happening is that our fight, flight, freeze mechanisms are being triggered. And in behaviour, what that looks like is irritability, anger, aggression. That's literally the fight part of fight, flight. Very sort of rigid thinking, not being able to problem solve, not being able to think, actually, you know I shouldn't speak to my colleagues like that, or I know that I shouldn't punch little Jimmy, because we're being driven from here, not from our thinking brain. So one of the things that's really, really crucially important for our emotional well-being is to recognize when our scaredy cat brain is in the driving seat. Because if we can recognize when he's in the driving seat, then what we fundamentally need to do first, before we do anything else, is help to soothe our scaredy cat. It's help to regulate down, soothe, calm our bodies, our nervous systems, our sensory systems. And when we do that, when scaredy cat feels safe again, and often the best way to do this is in the context of supportive relationships, when we're able to do that, then our wise owl brain comes back online all by itself, and then we can access all of that good thinking stuff. But for as long as we're feeling dysregulated, we can't make good use of our wise owl brain. And this guy is the reason, and this guy, these two work together. These guys are the reasons also why you might be struggling to sleep, why you might be struggling just to settle down, to relax, why you might be driven to keep doing. I don't know how many people baked 17 million more cakes or did 100 more projects around the house. Was that really coming from a place of rest and relaxation, or was it coming from a mobilization and need to do? Okay, I'm mindful of time, and I want us to sort of move on. Anna, when you folks have done this before, did the folks from forget the name of it, my wise owl brain's gone offline with these tech problems. Did they talk about the hand model of the brain?
I think they mentioned it, but I think it would always be worth revisiting it, because I think it's always helpful to remind people.
Okay, so when we're working with children, young people, when we're thinking about ourselves, we can use these kind of metaphors with young people to help them to think about where they're functioning from. For older kids, or for kids who don't work for whatever well with, I don't know anybody, even adults, who don't work well with these guys, but some people feel a bit daft using them. We can talk about the hand model of the brain, which again is pretty much the same thing. So this is your brain stem. So information comes in, is processed up through your brain stem. This little thumb part we can think of as the limbic system, the emotional brain. He's in the driving seat during anxiety. And then wrapped around that in our brain, in our heads, is our neocortex, our thinking brain. So when our brain is working well, when our mental health is working well, these three systems are working as one. The problem is that when we get too stressed, we flip our lid. And these parts of the brain don't talk to each other. They don't connect. And we're being primarily driven from our limbic brain and our brain stem. So again, the fundamental thing that we need to do to help ourselves is to notice this, to recognize it, to think about, how do I soothe my scaredy cat brain? How do I soothe my limbic brain? How do I regulate my brain stem brain to bring my thinking brain back online? And often in education, what we're trying to do is talk to this guy or talk to this guy before this guy is ready and able at a neurophysiological level to be able to engage with that learning. So this is really important for us to think about in supporting children and young people, but also thinking about our own mental health and our own well-being. Okay, so again, I just want to move on to talk a little bit about safety and the crucial importance of safety. So we've already talked about what happens when this information comes in. So within our moving down from our brain, we also need to think about what's happening in our body and in our nervous system, because we're not just heads, we're whole bodies. So I'm looking this way now because my screen that I can see the slides on is over here. So I'm sorry if it looks like I've got really weird eye contact with you. So as I say, all the time in everyday life, our brains and our bodies are reading these signals of danger and safety from all around us. And we're basically reading, are we safe? Are we not safe? And there's three really important circuits that are involved in this process. And this is like our defense system. This is our keeping alive system. And this is what's being triggered constantly through COVID. So if I feel safe, if I'm on a normal, good enough day, and I feel safe, then I'm functioning from this green zone, okay? And this is my optimal place of functioning. In this green zone, that's where my social engagement system's online. I'm interested in relationships. I'm interested in connecting with people. I'm able to use other people to support me and to help me to feel better. I'm alert, I'm motivated. You know, I'm not too switched off. I'm not too stressed. I'm just in that kind of like that just right kind of zone, okay? And in this zone, our dinosaur brain, our scaredy cat brain, and our wise owl brain are all really good friends, and they're all working well together, okay? And this is really good when you're in this zone, because we can also then use our wise owl brain to help soothe our scaredy cat. So we can do that kind of self-talk. You know, it's all right, I'm okay today. You know, things are fine, it's going to be fine. You know, I know what I'm doing, I've got this. All of that self-talk comes from wise owl brain. So we can use all of the parts of our brain to help us, to help ourselves. But to be able to function from this zone, we need to be calm, we need to be relaxed, we need to be sleeping well, we need to be eating well. And when we're in this zone, we're in the best place to help ourselves. So we can have a little bit of threat, that's no problem. We can't always stay in the green zone, it's never going to work, it's an unrealistic expectation to have of yourself. But we can bump in and out of it in an okay kind of a way. The problem is that as our arousal increases, so as we get more stressed, we start to move up this continuum. So if I feel unsafe, then I'm going to move into this red zone, this mobilizing zone, this doing zone. I need to get ready. This is our fight flight part of our defense system, okay? And what you want to notice for yourself if you're functioning from this place is that you're in a constant do, go, act, produce, get the next thing done kind of a place. If you notice that you're always functioning from this place and that you find it really hard to just be in this kind of green sort of relaxed, rest and digest, playful, kind of joyful, socially engaged place, then it tells you that your mobilization system is being triggered. We need to pay attention to this, because it's okay to function in this zone for a little while, but if this starts to become our default, if this is the way that we're functioning all the time, then it starts to have a much more significant impact on our emotional well-being. So what we notice in this zone is that we're much more irritable, we're much more anxious, we're much more rigid, so we can't, you know, we can only do what's in front of us, we can't do anything else. In this zone, we really struggle with change, we really struggle with transition, we really struggle with anything that's new or different or creative. And this is the danger for us going back, because so much of what we need to do is adapting to change. And so if you're finding that you're really struggling with that and you're really pulling back to old ways of doing things, just pay attention with yourself. Where am I functioning from? In this zone, you'll also be more irritable. You'll also be more likely to be quick-tempered, to go to anger more quickly. You're also more likely to be impulsive. So in this place, you start to be in a much more difficult place. If the stress carries on and there's no respite to your stress and you're just functioning in stress mode, our bodies and our brains don't like to be in this red zone for too long. Having too many stress hormones kicking around your system is damaging. So we have another inbuilt mechanism, which is our shutdown mode. So when the stress gets too big, then we move into this kind of blue zone, which is where we start to shut down. This is the freeze response, okay? And essentially what happens in this zone is that we start to feel much more hopeless. We start to feel more depressed. We start to feel more withdrawn. We start to isolate ourselves. We can't think straight. Our memory starts to get affected. And this is where we start to get that real loss of motivation. Like you just can't get going in the morning. You just don't want to do it. It's the kind of, I want to stick my head under the duvet, but it's in a more kind of prolonged way. And essentially what's happening in this, whereas in this red zone, what's happening is that our body's getting flooded with adrenaline and cortisol to get us ready to move. In this blue zone, what's happening is that our body's being flooded with natural opioids, natural painkillers, because this is like the last defense. It's kind of brace for impact. And when you feel this way, if you're feeling this way most of the time, that's when you might want to, be paying much more attention to your own emotional well-being and possibly seeking some support. So, as I say, in normal life, we don't stay in green zone. What happens is that we bump kind of seamlessly through, up and down through the green zone and the red zone. Okay, we all have stress in our life. We all have, stuff that's going on, and that's not a problem. And as long as that stress is kind of predictable or time limited, then we can kind of manage that. And what happens is that we get dysregulated, and then we regulate, and then we get dysregulated, and then we regulate. And as long as we're getting opportunities to regulate, to soothe, to feel calm, to feel restful, that's okay. We can cope well with stress. We manage. We're designed to deal with stress. The trouble is that if we have too much stress that is too unpredictable, too chaotic, too constantly changing, that's when we really struggle to cope, because we go into the red zone and we don't come back into the green zone. So instead if I can just move this slide on. Instead, what happens is that we go up and we go up and we go up and we go up. And that's when stress becomes more problematic. And this is why COVID is such a particularly stressful time, because usually in life, we either have a time limited period of stress. And, for most of us, if we'd been facing the level of stress that we've been facing over the last few months, we might have taken some time off work. We might have done something else to support ourselves. The problem with COVID is that we've just had to keep going. And whereas we might normally have, if you're feeling stressed, there might be somebody in your life that you can go to and offload that stress. Well, everybody's been feeling stressed. So actually the capacity to support each other has been reduced. So you can see how, over time, what happens is that you don't have those opportunities to come back into the green zone. COVID keeps tipping us higher and higher up the stress scale. So what happens with this, and again, this can be a really useful concept to think about with children, is if we think about this idea that we all have a window of tolerance, okay, a zone within which we can cope. And for most of us, most of the time, our window of tolerance might be quite big, and we can cope with most things that life throws at us. And if we have something particularly stressful, we'll have a whole arsenal of coping resources that we can use to help us. The problem with prolonged stress is that it shrinks our window of tolerance. So what we're able to deal with is much less. So we tip much more quickly into dysregulation. We tip more quickly into dysregulation and we have more extreme reactions. So thinking about that idea of window of tolerance, what are the things that shrink my window of tolerance? What are the things that extend my window of tolerance can be really helpful. And again, this is really helpful to do with kids and young people. So remember as well that in coping with stress, humans are fundamentally social creatures and we survive in the context of social groups. So even if we're doing relatively okay, if the group of people around us is all reacting in an anxious way, then it's sending those signals to our brains that things are not all well. And this is really important for your job in the next phase of transitioning kids back to school, is that if the adults in the system are stressed and dysregulated and not having access to support and not having those, not having opportunities to have your scaredy cat soothed, then it's going to be much harder for you to regulate the kids in school, because the strongest resource that we have in supporting children and young people's well-being is relationships. relationships with a safe and trusted and reliable adult, and that's you guys. So it's really important that you guys are protecting your own emotional well-being to help you to be able to regulate the kids, because a dysregulated adult can't regulate a dysregulated child. And so what happens is that the whole school atmosphere starts to become more tense. As the school atmosphere becomes more tense, so you're more likely to see behavioural acting out. I'm hoping this is making sense to people. Again, this is the problem of doing it this way. Okay, so again, I'm just going to do this one quickly because I think we've kind of covered it. But again, in terms of supporting young people, but also supporting staff groups, it's really important to think about the difference between kind of healthy stress and what we call toxic stress. So as I say, in healthy stress, a bit of stress is fine. It motivates us, it can focus our attention, it can give us that drive that we need, that oomph that we need, as long as we've got time to recover in between stressors. If we have stress and we can recover, actually that's the thing that builds our resilience. That's the thing that builds our capacity to cope. Because what we learn is things can be bad and they can be okay again. Things can be tricky, but I can get through it. You know, I can feel anxious, but there's somebody that I can rely on to help me. So little doses of stress are perfectly fine and actually help us to learn resilience. What's more problematic, as I've said, is if that stress is unpredictable, it's severe, it's prolonged, or if you don't have people to help you bring your levels of stress down. So what happens is, as I say, your stress goes up, and instead of coming down, it goes up, and then it goes up, and then it goes up. And that kind of stress doesn't develop into resilience. That type of stress just results in people being completely overwhelmed. And it's that type of stress that we have to manage and we have to support. So in terms of thinking about looking after yourself, and we're going to come on to talking about how you do that in a minute. The things that might sound obvious or basic, or that's just a bit too simple, at a physiological level, these are the things that are the most crucially important. Because what you're doing by doing these seemingly simple things is that you're working proactively to bring down your stress systems, to soothe your scaredy cat brain, and to bring your brain and your body and your physiology back into a place where it can cope. Okay, sorry, I'm just gonna, yeah. So again, as we move up this anxiety or sort of stress spectrum, what we find is that, as I say, we become more and more rigid, less and less flexible, and this is true of the kids as it is of the staff. So if you know, when you notice that kids are not coping well with transition and change, what that tells you is that the level of stress is too high. So we need to be thinking about how do we bring that stress down, and we're going to talk about that in a second. Okay, so sorry, I'm mindful of time. So one of the first things that we can do is checking in with ourselves. So this might sound obvious, or it might sound like a little bit of a luxury and you think, I've not got time to do this, but trust me, if you do nothing else, this will be one of the things that will help you the most in terms of your emotional well-being. Where am I? How am I feeling? How do I feel in my body? What am I noticing about myself? If I just stop for a few minutes and really pay attention, what's happening in my breathing? What's happening in my heart rate? What's happening to my sleep? What's happening to my eating patterns? Paying attention to where you are on that scale. Are you in the green zone? Are you in the red zone? Are you functioning most of the time from the blue zone? And do this as an exercise for yourself. What are the things that might be tipping you out of that window of tolerance? So your window of tolerance is your kind of green zone, just bumping a little bit into your red zone. What am I noticing about myself? If I'm moving into that red zone, What are the things that put me there? So for example, that might be things like, actually, I've got some additional health risks. I don't know what it's going to be like in the classroom. I don't know whether I'm going to be safe. I don't know whether by, returning to work, I'm essentially compromising my safety. Lots of different things will be going on for different people. But if it's those type of thoughts and those types of worries that are tipping you out of your window of tolerance, how do you pay attention to those? What are the things that you might need to be thinking about in terms of how you manage those? Are you thinking about them constantly non-stop all day and all night? Are they keeping you awake at night? Is it lots of, and sometimes the things that tip us out of our window of tolerance are not big things. It's like an accumulation of lots of little things. So sometimes we can be at risk of saying, there's nothing stressing me, I'm not stressed. And then when you really pay attention to it, it's like this and this and this and this and this. So what do you notice about yourself when you go into fight flight mode, into the red zone? What do you notice about yourself when you're slipping into the blue zone, the shutdown zone? What are the things that help me to feel safe and soothed and secure? And that will be different for different people. And this is why it's really hard to give people coping strategies, because actually, rather than thinking like, oh, breathing exercises are the holy grail, or mindfulness is the holy grail, or exercise is the holy grail, what's important about these things is that all of these things regulate your brainstem and your scaredy cat brain, but they don't all work in the same way for everybody. So it's trying to think of like almost like a menu of options rather than a specific one thing that's going to be your savior. So trying out some different things, keeping a diary of what works for you, what doesn't work for you. And if it doesn't work for you, ditch it, even if it works for somebody else. So like the thing I always say is baking. A lot of people baked during COVID. It was amazing. They had a fantastic time. I'm rubbish at baking. Baking is one of the most stressful activities I can do. So, baking is not going to help get me out of my red zone or my blue. It might tip me into my blue zone right enough. It might make me shut down, but it's definitely not going to do anything to help regulate me. So what might be the thing that you might need to do? And again, you can do these types of exercises with kids in your class. You can talk to them about this stuff, as well as you can do it for yourself. So thinking about what works for you and really prioritizing those things. Okay. Again, I just really want to emphasize this. This is a sort of pyramid of need that we sometimes use in therapeutic support, but again, it's just as applicable in this current situation with COVID. Sometimes what we do is when we're trying to think about solutions is that we try and get too technical and we try and get too fancy and we look for some magic program or, workbook that's going to help us out. Actually, at times of really significant stress like this, we need to start right from the bottom of the pyramid. And this is really, really significant to supporting the kids transitioning back to school right now. How do we create, as best we can under the circumstances that we're in, how do we create conditions of safety? And that's not just physical safety. There's lots of emphasis on physical safety right now, but that's also emotional safety. So how do we hold on to and recognize that for the kids, this is going to be for some kids, this is going to be totally fine. They're going to just breeze back and it'll be absolutely hunky-dory. For other kids, this is going to be really stressful, this transition back. They're going to feel really anxious. And some of the things that we take implicitly as adults, we forget to name explicitly with kids. So, being able to talk to kids about what some of their worries are, some of the things that they're not feeling sure about, some of these really simple steps. We talk about name it to tame it. It's much better to talk to your class about, is there anything that they're worried about? Is there anything that they're feeling not sure about? And don't just assume that they're going to be in the same place that you are, whichever way around that is. So helping to develop that sense of emotional safety and relational safety. Really can't emphasize this thing enough. It's not about strategies. This thing going back is, you've got your risk assessments, you've got your nuts and bolts, but the thing that's going to make the biggest difference to the kids is the relationships that you have with them. And I love that quote from Maya Angelou, which I think just, it perfectly encapsulates this. People forget what you do, people forget what you say, but they never forget how you make them feel. And that's the most crucial thing about this transition back to school. It's about creating a felt sense of, yeah, this is really weird. This is a bit scary. This is all new. but do you know what? We're going to figure it out together and we're going to be okay. And really anchoring into that real fundamental principle, I really can't emphasize it enough. Providing opportunities through the day for that comfort, for that co-regulation. I know we can't do physical touch, but that doesn't stop us from doing emotional co-regulation. And actually, you know, the vast majority of the support that we feel from other people doesn't even come through words. It comes through this. It actually comes mainly through this. Okay. So thinking about the tension that we're holding, the stress that we're holding, you know, am I in the class sort of, you know, come on kids, like, you know, it's going to be, we're going to get back to this and it's going to be fine and we're all going to be okay. And, you know, we don't have anything to worry about, you know, a bit of an exaggeration. Are you going to be listening to anything that I'm saying, or are you going to be watching the stress in my face? Whereas, you know, if I'm thinking about my whole body and how I'm welcoming kids back, you know, what my face is telling you is going to speak much more loudly than what my words are telling you. Okay, I'm conscious of the time and I want to drill into the nuts and bolts a little more about, okay, so how do we do this? How do we help our scaredy cat brain, our brainstem feel safer? The best way that we do this, as I've said, is about thinking about how do we reestablish that felt sense of safety, even if it's still not 100% physically safe? How do we create psychological safety? And the good news is there's lots of things that we can do to help us. The good news is that humans are incredibly resilient beasties. But we do have to go back to basics and we have to prioritize the basics. So our number one priority is helping our nervous systems and our brains to feel safe. The first way that we do that, as I've said already, is by recognizing this is stressful. This is not normal life. We're returning to some semblance of normal, but we're still getting lots of mixed signals about danger, lots of conflicting advice, conflicting research, conflicting guidance. So we have to prioritize our own well-being first. We have to put on our own oxygen mask first before we're any good at being able to help other people. Recognizing that feeling stressed is not a failure. It doesn't mean that you're not good at your job. It doesn't mean that you're not good at coping. All that it means is that you're experiencing a really normal human reaction to a really unprecedented situation in our lifetimes. It's okay to not feel okay. We just have to use our relationships and use our resources to help us through this time. So at a very basic level, that's about, you know, meeting our very basic needs, safety, training, thinking about what equipment, you know, all the stuff that you guys have been doing over the last, you know, few months and that you'll continue to do. The physical protection from harm stuff. And that's the stuff that we've been focusing on and you have been focusing on. Reducing. So think about the signals that we're giving to our scaredy cat brain and our dinosaur brain on a daily basis. Okay. How much time are they being flooded with danger signals, even at a neuroceptive, unconscious level? And how much of the time are they being fed messages of safety? I know certainly in the beginning of COVID, I was very guilty of watching, spent hours on social media and watching every news broadcast and following everything within an inch of my life. And actually what was happening was that I was feeling increasingly anxious and increasingly overwhelmed, because what I realized was I was basically flooding my nervous system with danger for very, very significant times of, you know, parts of the day. Now, of course, we need to stay on top of the guidance. We need to stay on top of an ever-evolving situation. But thinking about how much you're flooding your body with stress versus how much of the time are you flooding your body with safety and with relaxation and with soothing. And notice when you don't have the balance right. And that will be different for different people. Recognize that you will be more mentally tired and that that's totally normal. The reason that you're more mentally tired is because, remember, this guy's not working so well. So if you used to be somebody who was a really efficient problem solver, quick decision maker, really effective, good at time management, and you're noticing that you're just not able to do all of that in the same way anymore, it's probably because your wise owl brain is not working so effectively. Memories impacted, emotional information processing is impacted, processing speed is impacted. All these things are real, you know, these are real physical effects of anxiety. So when our brain feels mushy, when we don't feel like we're coping, it's not because you've suddenly forgotten how to do your job or you're suddenly rubbish at it. It's just that your wise owl brain needs a little bit of support. We need a little bit of help to get Scaredy Cat back under control so that wise owl can do his job. So having those down times are really, really important. Thinking about routines. Now, schools are really, really good at this. And, you know, this is, again, it's something that sounds so basic that it almost sounds too obvious. But our brains are, as human beings, we really like predictability. Particularly at times of stress or anxiety, we really need predictability. We need to know what's happening now, next, then. And this is equally true for the kids that we support as it is for ourselves. So being really clear in your expectations of each other, being really clear in what's about to happen, not holding the assumption that because you know, everybody else knows what's going to happen, or thinking that it's obvious what's going to happen next. And this is especially true for the kids, especially around transition times. Being really, really clear with routine and structure is really important. And it's really important because remember that our Scaredy Cat brain can't tell the time. So it can't tell the time between something that's happening right now and something that might happen in the future or something that might happen in the past. So it's really, really important that we timestamp events now, next, then, so that everybody knows what's coming. And if you do that, it really does help to reduce anxiety. For our own selves, we've probably, if you're anything like me, I'm sure it's not just me, you know, your own body clock goes out of sync, your own rhythm goes out of sync. And the next phase is very much about getting back in sync if you haven't already been doing that. So the normal working day gives us that structure, and we've been kind of off grid. Even if you have been working through COVID, it's all been working very differently. But actually, as simple as it sounds, and it might sound a bit rigid, but it's really important, particularly if you are struggling, getting up at the same time every day, going to bed at the same time, having your meals at predictable times. Teachers are like psychologists. You are rubbish at taking breaks. You're rubbish at eating a nutritious meal. You're often eating on the hoof, drinking on the hoof. Really making time to nourish yourself is really, really important during this time, because if we're in a physically good place, then we're going to be in a mentally good place. Thinking about routines for things that help you to feel good. Things that help you to feel good are not a luxury right now. They are as fundamentally important as food, water, and breathing. Because if we don't concentrate on regulation, then we're not going to be helping ourselves. You know, it really is as basic as that. We think about things as taking time out, exercising, you know, doing a hobby, doing an activity. We can often think of those as luxuries, like if I've got time, I'm going to do that. And what I would really, really encourage you to do is that they're fundamentally crucial, because think about that stress graph. You're going to have these slides to look back afterwards. Think about the stress graph. If we don't build in times to down-regulate, we're not going to cope. It's just as simple as that. At times of stress, we've got to find ways to bring our brains and bodies and nervous system, our physiology, back into the green zone, even if it's just for little periods of time. So whatever works for you. Breathing is one of the most fundamentally important things. It sounds really, really obvious, but actually when we're anxious, when we're tense, we hold our breath. We have very shallow breathing. And when we do that, we're not nourishing our body with good oxygen flow. When we're not nourishing ourselves with good oxygen flow, we're not bringing down our nervous systems. So whatever works for you, you know, I don't want to be prescriptive in saying do this and do that. There are hundreds and thousands of resources out there around these kinds of things. But paying attention to the breath, things like mindfulness, there's free apps that you can get. Headspace is a really good one. The Calm app is another really good one. Going for a walk, getting out in nature, anything that involves movement. I got into a super bad habit before my annual leave there of just sitting at this desk doing things like this for 8, 9, 10 hours a day. And my physical health really suffered for it. We've got to find movement breaks. We've got to stretch. Anything that involves rhythm, anything that involves pattern, anything that involves music is really, really, really helpful. If any of you don't know about it, there's a website called Beacon House. I think I've put it on the resource list. A website called Beacon House, which has loads and loads of really good resources around calming our brain stem, so calming our dinosaur brain, calming our scaredy cat brain. There's loads and loads of ways that you can do it. So I'm not going to go into all the ways that you can do regulation right now. That if anybody wants signposting to additional resources, I'm happy to do that. But the most important thing is finding things that work for you, developing a personal menu. What works for you, what doesn't work for you. Relaxation. Relaxation, I'm talking to myself here as much as anybody else. Relaxation doesn't involve doing something else at 100 miles an hour. Okay, really watch out for that one. So if you are someone who, let's say you're somebody who knits, okay, but what you notice about yourself is that when you knit, instead of it being restful and relaxing, you know, you're knitting at 100 miles an hour and you're knitting for 7 hours a day, you're not in your green zone, okay? You're still in your red zone. You're just doing knitting in your red zone as opposed to doing some other kind of stressing in your red zone. So that's sometimes the mistake that people make with relaxation, is that, remember, in relaxation, it's supposed to be slow. It's supposed to be calming. It's supposed to be deliberate. What it's not is doing something else crafty or hobby-wise, but still doing it at 100 miles an hour. I hope that makes sense to people. This is really, really, really important. Oh, my screen's gone wonky again. Come back. Okay. Relational support, again, we've already talked a bit about. It's crucial to understand and to remember for ourselves and for young people that resilience is not an individual quality. Okay. Resilience doesn't just happen within you. Resilience happens in the context of safe, supportive relationships. We're biologically wired for social and emotional connection. So this social distancing, this not being able to touch each other, not being able to hug, not being able to put a soothing hand on someone's shoulder, these are fundamental alien things to us as humans because we rely so heavily on relational regulation. So we have to proactively think with each other, with children, young people, how do we create opportunities for relational connection that doesn't involve touch? So rather than it just becoming a vacuum where we just don't do that, how do we do it in other ways? How do we do that checking in with each other? How do we do that noticing? You know, you all right, Jimmy? It doesn't have to be big convoluted things, but it does have to be kind of deliberate checking in, deliberate checking out. How are you? How are you getting on? How are things for you? One of the best ways that we can manage stress are two sort of biggies for managing stress. One is relationships. The other is regulation. And within that, what we're often doing is creating meaning. So when we talk to people about how we feel, when we express what's going on for us, what we're actually doing is creating stories. We're making meaning about what's happening. We're developing a narrative that sits around the situation. And humans like stories. We like narratives. We like to be able to make sense of things. And if we don't make sense of things, then we just create fantasies and alternative versions of things in our head. So again, talking with children, young people, talking with each other about what's going on, what's stressful, thinking about how we use relationships to set the emotional tone of your school. So again, if you guys are all stressed to the hilt and you guys are not being well supported and you're not able to sort of look after yourselves, then the whole emotional temperature of the school is going to be more stressed. And that's when you start to get more problems. For anyone who is struggling more, there are additional support helplines out there, whether that be externally through mental health helplines. Again, I'll put some resources around places that you can contact around that. And remembering that, at times of stress, relationships rupture. We get annoyed with each other, we get irritated with each other, we fall out with each other, we're more grumpy with each other. So actually really focusing on the importance of relational repair. If you have been snappy with a colleague, if you have been, out of line, if you have snapped at a kid when, maybe they hadn't done anything that was particularly bad, own it, go back and repair that, name it to tame it. Actually, I'm really sorry, Jimmy, I shouldn't have spoke to you like that. I'm just, today is just feeling like a really difficult day, but I shouldn't have taken it out on you. I'm really sorry. Actually, just doing that, the other person is probably feeling the same way. And not sitting on tension is just so important right now. Working to proactively reach back and repair with each other is so important. Okay, resist excess. Again, I'm hoping I'm not just talking to myself here. At times of stress, one of the things that we do is that our body is trying to regulate scaredy cat at a physiological level. And so sometimes what we do is that we try and find physiological ways to help us feel better. And that could be things like, fatty, sugary, salty foods, because they do make us feel better. It could be increasing our alcohol intake. It could be resorting to drugs, legal or illegal. It could be staying up and binge watching TV really late into the night. Whatever it is that's if you notice that you're doing any of these things to excess above and beyond what you would normally do, it's probably a sign that you're essentially trying to self-medicate. You're trying to self-regulate, but you're doing it in a way that's working against your biology. So if you notice that you're getting into those kind of things, pay attention. The other excess that I've put on there is really try and avoid overcommitting yourself, especially if you're somebody who's usually a good helper. Because when you do that, think, where am I functioning from? You're probably functioning from your red zone. It's that mobilization, fight, flight bit of you that's being driven. So yeah, I'll do that, I'll get involved in this, I'll help with that, I'll put that together. If you're overcommitting yourself, it's often a sign that you're functioning from a place of stress. So just be curious with yourself, notice that within yourself. Because apart from anything else, if you're overcommitting yourself, you're not giving yourself enough physical time in your day, in your waking hours, to do this down regulation that's going to be so important to keep you on the right track. You're going to run out of time because you've filled all your time with activities. Remembering to timestamp and reframe. What I mean by this is, again, remember that Scaredy Cat doesn't timestamp so well. So instead of thinking about, God, what's this going to be like in 3 months' time? What's this going to be like in 6 months? What's this going to be like for the rest of the term? Thinking about, where you can, thinking about, okay, what does this mean for today? Today I'm safe. Today the kids are okay. Today we're functioning. I've got my plan for today. And if nothing else, you just focus your attention away from spiraling thoughts about the future and into what's happening right now. And actually, often when you do that, it feels safer, because actually the reality is you are okay right now. And there might be more, crud along the line, but right now, right here today, you're doing okay. Okay, I'm just going to do this one quickly and then we'll stop, because I'd promised time for questions and I'm conscious that I'm running out of time because of the mishaps with the technology. Okay, so one of the things that can sometimes be really helpful, in my therapeutic work, I predominantly work from a model called DDP. And within this model, a really central component is what we call PACE. And PACE is an attitude, it's a relational style, it's an emotional compass. It's not a strategy to be done, but it's just more, think of it more as being a way to be. And PACE can really help us through stress and anxiety. It can really help us with our relationships. It can really help us not to react in an unhelpful way. It also can really help us to stay aware of our own minds and the minds of other people. So the P part of PACE starts for play or playfulness. So In the midst of all the stress, we can still find even small moments of lightness, of joy, of playfulness, of gratitude. And that's not to minimize how difficult things are for people, but it's about trying to find that right balance. So sometimes the things that can be really helpful, our brains automatically go to negative. What's not working? What do we still not have nailed? What's still not going right? What do we still need to work on? And sometimes it can be really helpful to pay equal attention to actually what's gone well today, what did work okay, what was good about today, what am I feeling grateful for today. And playfulness for children is so, so, so important to their well-being. So sometimes as adults, understandably, we get very focused on the risk, we get very focused on the regulations, we get very focused on adhering to the guidance, but let's not lose playfulness and lightness and joy from the school day and from the rhythm of the day, because these are really important and these are the things that will help to regulate the kids. Acceptance in this situation comes from acceptance for what we can't change. In this situation, inevitably, there are things that we would like to be different. There are things that we would want to change, but we can't change. And if we spend our energy battling and fighting and feeling resentful for the things that we can't change, we use a lot of energy and we risk burning ourselves out. And at the end of the day, those things don't change anyway. So trying to focus on what's within my circle of control and what's not within my control, and focus your energy on the things that are within your control, because those are the things that if you feel like you need to mobilize and you're always mobilizing against something you can't control, that's when you feel more stressed. If you mobilize around things that you can change, that will reduce your anxiety. So letting go of the things that we can't control, focusing on what we can, acceptance for the fact that you are going to feel up and down and you are going to feel back to front. And if we, a bit like our finger traps, I don't know where it's gone, it's vanished. A bit like our finger traps, if we can accept how we're feeling rather than trying to fight against it or shove it down or, then we're going to get on a lot better. Sometimes if you notice that your anxiety is rising up and you think, oh God, actually I'm all right, sometimes we can be playful with ourselves. When we notice our stress is rising, we can thank our scaredy cat brain, thank you for noticing that this is a stressful situation, but actually you're not the most helpful person for me right now. So we kind of thank him for his service, but realise that we're not in full-blown terror. Your job is immediate life threat and danger, and I'm not in immediate life threat and danger. I need to get this guy back online. And sometimes just by kind of being playful like that with yourself in your own head, you can bring your wise owl back online, and then he can help you out. Curiosity. This is a big thing. It's a big thing for us, for each other, for the kids that we support. Curiosity for how we start to make sense of some of this stuff. Curiosity for what's going on for other people. Why are they reacting that way? Why are they behaving that way? What's really going on? What's this really about? Why am I behaving this way? If we start from a place of curiosity, rather than just going straight into solution, we're probably going to get on a lot better. Because often what we're trying to do is put solutions into place before we've really understood what the issue is. So if you notice that you're not functioning the way that you normally would, be curious for yourself about why that is. If you're noticing that other people aren't functioning the way that they normally would, hold curiosity for why that is. And the last one is empathy. Empathy for yourself, for other people. This gets harder over time, as I've said. We can have, we're all good at doing empathy for the short term, but holding empathy for the long term is much harder. And this is when you start to feel more burnt out, or when you're more at risk of things like compassion fatigue. So if you start to notice that your empathy is low, you're irritable more often, that's a time that we have to, pay attention to who's in the driving seat. Where are you in your window of tolerance? I just wanted to finish on this. So, sometimes, again, as educators, as problem solvers, as solution finders, we want to have the solution. We want to know. We want to, we want to know what to do about a situation. And actually, COVID is different, because in COVID there might not be a solution. And actually, just remembering sometimes that people don't always need advice. Sometimes all they need is a hand to hold, an ear to listen, and a heart to understand them. People forget what you say, people forget what you did, but they never forget how you make them feel. And that's going to be one of the really important things for going forwards. It's not always about having the right answer, but it is about sitting with people in their anxiety, in their worry, talking about it, co-regulating, making meaning, creating stories about what's happening to help make sense of what's going on. And just to finish on this very last one, I just really like these little doodles from Charles Mackesy. Actually, I've spelled his name wrong on that slide. It says, "I can't see a way through," said the boy. "Can you see your next step?" "Yes." "Just take that," said the horse. And I think that's kind of where we are right now. You know, this is going to be completely new for everybody. It's going to feel really strange. But if we just take it one step at a time, keep supporting each other, we will find a way through it because we're designed to be resilient. Okay, I'm going to stop there. I'm hoping that some of that has made some sense. I don't know, we have got a few minutes for questions. I don't know if there's any burning issues that have come up from the, I can't see the chat, so if anything's come up from the chat, Anna, or if anybody's made any comments.
I think as per last time, Marie, everyone's so gripped that that they don't type anything because they're too busy intently listening, so thank you. Marie, one thing I wanted to just ask was, there's a slide where you've got Goldilocks and the three bears.
Ah, yes.
And I just wondered whether you could just mention that. I know some people will have to leave us, but I'll carry on recording.
Yes.
Because you didn't mention it, and I know from last time people had said that was...
I know, I did. Yeah, let me go back. Yeah, I didn't mention it, did I? Okay. Okay, so I think it was on this one.
That's the one.
Yeah. So it was when I was thinking about, when we're thinking about the window of tolerance and this idea of, you know, where am I functioning from? Am I in my green zone? Am I in my red zone? Am I in my blue zone? And sometimes, again, if you just thinking about it for yourself, because I like stories better than I hate neuroscience. I like stories. So this analogy works better for me, works well for young people, is thinking about it like Goldilocks and the three bears. So where am I? Okay. Am I too hot? That's in your red zone. You know, you're in your fight flight. Am I too cold? That's when you're in your shutdown, withdrawn, loss of motivation, disconnected, you know, head under the duvet, in your flight mode. Or am I just right? And when I'm just right, I'm kind of in my green zone. I might be bumping up a little bit against my red zone, but I'm basically in my green zone. So using that kind of analogy with kids, you know, how are you feeling today? Too hot, too cold, just about right? Too hot? Okay, what might help you to feel just right? What are the things that we might need to do differently today? Or what might you need to help you feel safe and secure? And again, thinking about some of our children who've got additional needs, additional vulnerabilities, children and young people, or even adults, in fact, who may have more vulnerability to the impact of stress, where actually pre-COVID, their window of tolerance was small. So, for example, in my world, looked after children, adoption, kids who've experienced very significant early adversity and early trauma, their window of tolerance is already much smaller than, you know, children of their age who haven't had that additional trauma, that additional adversity. So if they were already functioning on a small window of tolerance, the more stressors that you add, the more unpredictability that you add, the more anxiety, the more relational disconnect that you add, the smaller their window of tolerance and the more likely they are going to be functioning from a too hot or a too cold zone. So particularly for your more vulnerable young people, but actually, you know, for anybody, because humans are humans, and at times of stress, we all pretty much function in the same way. Does that make sense?
That's great, thank you. I just remembered last time people had said it was a really useful analogy.
Yeah. So I've got it on the slide and I didn't talk about it.
Yeah, no, that's fine. Yeah. And the other thing I think as well is that, you know, quite often what we forget is that, you know, some of the language and the metaphors that like you might introduce us today kind of help us in our own child place.
Absolutely.
You know, rather than all the kind of scientific language that actually makes it feel a bit inaccessible.
Absolutely. And that's really important because, you know, you know, talking about neuroscience involves this guy, you know, like high level cognitive process, and like, who's got space for that right now? Yeah, like, I know I don't. So actually for me, I would, you know, that's why I like these guys, it's why I like Goldilocks, because, you know, everybody can kind of understand this stuff. You know, how's my scaredy cat today? That's a much easier thing to think about and talk about with kids than to say, you know, your limbic system is feeling a little dysregulated. You know, like, we don't talk like that, do we? So it's just finding stories, metaphors, ideas. But what we do in this is essentially we're making meaning. So it's exactly what I was saying. It's creating a narrative, creating a story, creating a meaning that helps our brains to process what's happening. Because if we can understand what's happening to us, and we can understand why we feel the way that we feel, it takes a lot of the heat out of it. It doesn't, you know, get rid of it completely, but it really helps us to make sense. And if we can make sense, then our wise owl brain can help our scaredy cat brain. You know.
Thanks, Marie. I've just had somebody say I'd put up the Beacon House link, so I've just reposted it again in the chat, just in case people wanted to have a look at that. What we wanted to ask people to do is, we've just got a really, really short poll just to do as part of an evaluation at the end. And then if before you leave us, you could perhaps type a couple of words just in the chat about, you know, something you've learned today, or how helpful or not you found today. And yes, we'll email the slides out, so they'll come from the BEP events email address, I think, hopefully later on today. So, I mean, if people have questions, then do feel free to stay for a little bit, but I'm also mindful that, you know, people need to head off and get back into their hectic day jobs and things like that, but hopefully with a slightly renewed level of insight into their own self-care. So I'll pop the poll up, Marie, now, if that's all right, but also just to say a huge thank you to you. I know you were on leave until yesterday, and kind of, you know, you've come back in and we've thrown you into this, but I really, you know, value your insight and your wisdom. I could talk to you all day quite happily.
Yeah, I'm really sorry about the technology glitches. We will get there with the technology. It's one of the things that,
lucky for the next one.
It's one of the things that dysregulates my scaredy cat brain the most. Like, doing it live, it never seems to glitch, but doing it this way, it's definitely a new experience that we're all trying to juggle. So apologies for the technical glitches.
No worries. We've got another session, haven't we, in October? I think it's October the 22nd.
Yeah.
So if you do want to, you know, let people you know about the next session, then please do. You can access the booking through the BEP events webpage, which is, or should be, I'll put it up now in the chat, which you should be able to get to. Here, hopefully. But yes, my hope is that you can take something back into your schools and things with you. So the next session, Sabrina, you just asked about the next session. So we're doing a repeat of this one. We wanted to do one as a twilight session as well, didn't we? So I think we're starting at maybe 4 o'clock, Marie?
Yeah, I think that sounds good. I think
it's 4 o'clock. So yeah, so do, you know, let colleagues and people know, because we'll be doing that at 4 o'clock on the 22nd.
And Anna, just for just because I'm a technology donkey, I don't know about these things. Do people, just in terms of the poll, do people know? Are people confident with how to do the polls? Do they know what to do if they've not done one before?
That is a good question. I think, does it just appear? I could say this as an equal Luddite. I think it just appears on your screen and you scroll down and click through it. I can see Mandy and Anna now, so I feel quite certain I can ask them to how they did it just now.
I've just done it. It's dead easy. It just pops up on your screen. You don't need to ask for it, and there's only 3 questions that you click on, and then it all disappears when you submit it.
Okay, fab.
Is that all right?
Thank
yeah.
you. But yeah, if you've got nothing else you want to ask and you want to head off, then feel free to leave. And I would just say go well and go steady to everybody, and you know, take some time to experiment with what works for you around your own self-care. And we'll send the slides out to you well, hopefully later on today they should land. If for some reason they don't arrive, then email the email address that you got this link from. Somebody will be able to help you. So go well, everybody, and look after yourselves.
And as Anna says, if anyone's got a burning question, because I'm conscious I didn't leave time, I'm happy to stay on for a few minutes if anybody's got anything that they want to ask. Otherwise, thank you very much and good luck. Go well.
Well, somebody just asked me if the recording comes with the slides. The recording will go up onto the Birmingham Women's and Children's Hospital's You've Been Missed page. So you'll be able to go onto that site and it will be there along with some other ones as well. So you'll be able to hopefully access it through that. Last time we had a whole load of technical issues, didn't we, Marie? So yeah. You would have had no sound to go with it. So hopefully this one will work.
Yeah.
But yes, you can share it. Sorry, yes, that was just share the link with colleagues. That's fine.
Yeah, so I just thought, well, start of the new year, Bernadette will be about basic anyway.
Are we still recording, Anna, or do you want to pop the recording off?